Kingdom greetings and God's richest blessings be multiplied to you and to your beloved family. You're tuned into another segment of Healing Our Land's live interactive broadcast here on the Boston Praise Radio ONTV Network. I'm your host, Pastor Hobbs. Be with you through till 6 p.m. We are running extremely late on today, and I profusely apologize and ask for your forgiveness. Not only that we are late on today, but I am running late, and I have a guest today in the studio with me, and the person of Michael Patton, who is running for District 3 City Councilor. So first and foremost, welcome, my brother.
Thank you.
And again, forgive me for being late.
No, absolutely fine.
Thank you. So tell us and our listening and viewing audience, who is Michael Patton?
Well, I don't want to be rude, but it's Matthew.
You're not being rude. I'm being rude. Thank you for correcting me. You should have corrected me earlier. I'll change that. No. Matthew.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, totally fine. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a workers' rights attorney. I'm a community organizer. I learned at a young age the importance of standing up for what's right and serving your community. When I entered kindergarten, I had a speech impediment and I struggled to learn to read. And so it was my teachers, after school professionals and others who kind of lifted me up and over those disabilities. And so because of that, I kind of understand the benefit of service. And for that reason, I'm not new to service. I joined the Mark Kennedy Shriver Congressional Campaign in college and worked with him and his family's organizations, the Special Olympics, Best Buddies, working with Special Olympics athletes to launch a campaign called Spread the Word to End the Word, to empower individuals with intellectual disabilities to kind of raise their voices in advocacy. I came back after college and continued to kind of advance values of equity and opportunity, working for Governor Deval Patrick. I was one of the first individuals hired on Senator Elizabeth Warren's first campaign. I actually met my wife there. So my mother thinks that her grandchildren are the best thing to come out of that campaign. I would argue a really good senator. And so now I'm a workers' rights attorney on a daily basis. I advance the values of opportunity for workers, fighting to make sure that they receive a minimum wage, make sure that they're paid overtime, take on discrimination, whether it's based on race, sex, age. But I'm running because I think we need to do more around equitable services in the city of Boston. As someone who entered school not in the same place as others, I fully understand that not every kid is coming to school in the same place, whether it's a learning disability, whether it's English as a second language, whether it's a parent working 2 or 3 jobs and can't do as much as they want for their child's education. So we need to do more around equity in education. And I think we need to do more to confront the housing crisis, but also to make sure that we're working on the infrastructure that supports that housing, right? So whether we're talking about transportation, whether we're talking about open space. So I think we have a lot of work to do in the city of Boston to make sure that we're kind of holding the city services up to a higher standard.
Okay, great. So let me back up. I want a little bit. So were you born here? A little bit more about you.
Me.
Yeah.
So I was born on the North Shore of Massachusetts. I met my wife, as I mentioned, working for Senator Warren, and we have now lived in the city. It makes me feel old to say for 13 years. We live in Savin Hill with our 2 kids. We have a 5-year-old Josephine who's entering BPS kindergarten in the fall. And then her brother Jude is not too far behind her. He's 3.
Beautiful. So with regard to the school systems, because again, it's a big issue, and every candidate that has sat in that seat, we ask the same question in the context of education. Here in the city of Boston, the non-binding referendum that has overwhelmingly said Bostonians want a fully elected school committee. We're the only city in the Commonwealth that does not have a fully elected school committee. The mayor, our mayor Wu, has campaigned on a hybrid. She is maintaining her position that that's what she is going to implement. And honestly, many of us feel we elect whomever we elect, whether it's a city councilor, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a governor, to represent the will of the people, not do what you want to do, particularly when we've said this is what we want. So, so I'm asking the city councilors their positions because it's important. Unfortunately, unfortunately, or unfortunately, the way that it stands, regardless of even if unanimously every city councilor said that they wanted a fully elected school committee, I believe the mayor can override that. But nonetheless, it's important, I think, to understand our representation on the city council level, and as we continue to fight for what we want in this community. So I'm curious, what is, not to put you in an awkward position, but I have to ask everyone this because it's important to understand, as you said, the leadership of just bold positions as to where people stand one way or another. So as it relates to elected school committee, hybrid school committee, particularly when you have children who are in the position and who go to Boston Public School, what is your feeling about the elected school committee, hybrid, or fully appointed?
So I think, it's not an awkward question, right?
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, I think education is the number one thing that we need to focus on to make sure that every child has a pathway to success.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see in the city of Boston is we provide some of the best education in the country, right, in the world, but not to every kid.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is a critical thing that we need to kind of talk about is whether it's elementary, middle, high school, we have some of the best schools, but not every child has access to that. Mm-hmm. So I think what we need to do is we need to look at why that is. Mm-hmm. I visited the other day a school called Epiphany.
Oh, yeah.
And if you know Epiphany,
yeah.
They take students in 5th grade whose math and other skills are at about a 2nd grade level. Mm-hmm. And when those kids are leaving in 8th grade, they're at about a 10th grade level. Mm-hmm. And they go about 11 months a year. They have wraparound services. They have services that continue to follow the children after they leave 8th grade into high school, out of high school. Mm-hmm. They have a program where they can help kids pay for college, like for last dollar of college. And that program, right, 11 months a year, getting kids who are underperforming in 5th grade to overperform in 8th grade, they're paying about $35,000 a year per child. The city of Boston is paying about $31,000 a year per child. And so I think when we talk about if we're going to change the school committee, I think we're talking about the wrong thing. Okay. I think what we need to be talking about is how are we going to look at Boston Public Schools and make sure that someone is accountable so that when we're spending $31,000 a year, every child has access to a high quality education. How are we going to be spending money so that every child has access to universal pre-K? We need to stop talking about it and we need to make sure that it happens. The data is there. And so I think it's the wrong question. I think the question needs to be, how are we going to hold the people in power accountable? What I would say is, what I would like to do is fully fund universal pre-K, follow where that $31,000 per child is going and figure out what is working and what is not so every child has access to a high quality education. And then we need to fix the buildings. When Josephine, my daughter, right, so we get the list of schools she can go to, so we go look at the different schools. And some of the schools are incredible, right? Some of the schools have swimming pools and music classes and STEM classes. And some of the schools don't have any of that. And some of the schools don't have air conditioning. They don't have heating, right? They're bringing water in because the pipes are insufficient, right? The ceilings are caving in. And so we need to be fixing and investing in the infrastructure of our schools. So I think when we talk about the structure, I think we need to talk about what is the structure that we're going to be able to hold people accountable to make sure that every child has access to a high quality education. And so if Mayor Wu puts forward a hybrid proposal, that would be my question. And my question is, how does moving to an elected school committee, how does that get us to hold people accountable to make sure every child has access to a high quality education? And so I think that is the question we need to be asking. I would be open to it, but I want to ask the question, how is it going to get us to where we actually need to go? Which is not who's overseeing the schools, it's how does every child have access to a high quality education?
I love it. I love it. That's a great answer, and I think that is ultimately the outcome that we should be aspiring. And the truth, as you said, this is the educational mecca of the world. People come from all over the world to go to higher institutions of learning here in Massachusetts, and it's unacceptable. I don't have children biologically. However, I was a person who did go to a vocational technical high school, and I loved it. It's the thing that put me on a trajectory to be okay, and even that was challenging, quite candidly. The academic side of it for me, but I did it, and I learned a lot of things, and so I'm a proponent of something for everybody. Well,
it's your T-shirt, right? T. Michael. Right?
Yeah, tobacco
right?
Yeah,
right. And so I think as we think about education, not everyone learns the same.
Yes.
Right? And not everyone is going to in their adult life do the same work, right? So people learn differently.
Yeah.
And so we need to, so when we talk about education, we need to talk about equitable education, right? Because as I said, I needed different resources than other kids. The kids at Epiphany need different resources than others. And so as we think about education, not everyone needs the same thing. And we need to be able to diagnose what different children need, and we need to be able to make sure that they get access to equitable resources, and that yes, some are going to go to vocational school and do trades, some are going to become coders, some are going to become doctors, some are going to become lawyers. But what we need to do is make sure that every child has access to a high quality education, so whatever their skills are, they can go into those different things, and that the education that they're provided doesn't pick that for them, but they, through the skills that they have, choose what path to go to.
I love that. That kind of, it kind of, let me ask you this way. So with situations like the John D. O'Brien, I believe that is another school, right, that is, unfortunately, Mayor Wu did make a decision, because it was a press conference, to move this school, and people were up in arms, particularly graduates of that school, saying like, no, how are you going to do this, without even input from the community. And so I think that has slowed that, but even in the context of your point in terms of outcome, right? So, and because again, people have been focusing on elected, hybrid, and one does kind of, because you said accountability, and I think that's one of the reasons why the mayor has been, saying fully elected and or opposed to even elected, was because the buck stops with her being the mayor. So in terms of accountability, was the reason for the pushback, was let it stop here. And then I guess the hybrid maybe was a compromise. I don't know, but nonetheless. So how would you reconcile the situation as it relates to the John D. O'Brien and what you're saying in terms of your strategy?
So I think as we look at the O'Brien, I think a couple things. First is we have a lot of discussion about exam schools.
Yes.
But there are not enough seats at exam schools for every child, right? So we need to expand high quality education. And so I think what I commend the mayor for doing is trying to do that, right? I think that is what the proposal is trying to do, is expand the number of seats. I also think it's important to expand vocational education, right? You're a product of it, and I think we see that is incredibly beneficial, right? It is not the vocational schools of the 1950s, right? It is a much different thing. And so I think that I commend her for trying to push that forward. I do kind of hear the concerns of the community, right? It's a far distance from the folks that it's currently serving. So there's both the transportation piece, but then there's also the community piece, right? So it's not just the school grounds itself, but where are the students going to get lunch after? Where are they hanging out? Do they feel comfortable there, right? It's a cultural thing. And so I think we need to think about how we're going to address those. And so I think they're starting to work through some of that. And I hope that the community continues to advocate. And I think another piece to this is what I actually think we're seeing in this process is community debate, right? Differing opinions in a respectful way. And I think it will push forward, hopefully, the outcome of creating more high quality seats, right? because just because we have different opinions on how to get there doesn't mean we can't work together to get there. And so I think it's showing that we can have that healthy debate. But I hear the community, and I think it's important we work through kind of how do we make sure that transportation, so that the community it's currently serving doesn't start to be underserved? And how do we make sure that the students that are going there from that community feel comfortable in not just the school, but the surrounding community, right? So they can go get breakfast before school, or, right, they go hang out at the pizza shop or things like that, or there's other cultural places that they can go and that they feel comfortable being at.
In that same vein, with regard to these higher institutions of learning, or pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes for colleges. So I feel as though, and many of us feel as though, these institutions that are benefiting from being here are not giving their fair share back to the community in which they
Correct.
are buying up property, sprawling out, getting endowments, or getting fatter.
Yep.
So
Harvard has a $50.9 billion endowment. And I think it was about 10 years ago, it was $40 billion. And so it's grown by about $10 billion. They are not paying their full amount of pilot. They use Boston Police. They use Boston Fire. They use the roads that we plow. They use the sidewalks that we fix, right? They are using the services that the city of Boston pays for. And so they should be contributing their fair share to make sure that all of those things are functioning. And so as we talk about schools, right, Boston public schools that don't have air conditioning, that don't have heating,
Right.
and have to bring in water,
Right.
yet over on the Charles River, Harvard is building basically a new community,
Right.
but won't pay their fair share.
Right.
That is unacceptable. And so I think Harvard, or any place that has a $50.9 billion endowment, their pilot is a rounding error for them, and they should be paying their fair share. Full stop.
Love it. love it. I agree. It's and that for education, as you said, and even across the board, right? Because I would submit even so returning citizens, right? Folks coming out of incarceration need to be able to get a trade or an education, something that they can make a living wage, become homeowners. Like, that needs to be the trajectory that we're talking about, from either from being released from incarceration into this trajectory of how do you break this cycle of recidivism.
Yeah. And it's the trades, it's right. We have a severe shortage of workers, right? Nursing, bus drivers, right? I was talking to a friend yesterday. He can't get a plumber for a leak at his house, right? So
Yes,
right, like and then right, even when you talk about large construction, they need more workers.
Yes.
So we need to make sure that whether it's T. Michael's work, whether it's others, whether it's vocational training, that we're assisting folks to get the skills to fill the jobs that are out there, because there is work to be done, but it is work that needs folks who have a specific skill, and we need to make sure that we can bridge those gaps.
I love that you obviously know about T. Michael and People's Academy. Tell me what you know about it.
So I met T. Michael at the Dorchester Day Parade, and if you know T. Michael, he introduced himself very strongly.
Yes.
And I actually went over and visited the work that they do. I think it's an incredible work. I think it is serving a population that is underserved in that space. I think the metal work is incredible.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a lawyer. I am not handy with my hands. So anytime I see someone who can actually kind of create art out of something like that, I think it's really, really inspirational. I think he kind of represented the city at the NAACP convention. I think they had some sculptures over.
Oh, nice.
So I think that was great to kind of have
Yes.
a representation at that national convention.
National
Convention.
yes,
So I
yes.
think that was great that he was able to kind of get some stuff over there.
Awesome.
And I think the work that they're doing is really, a good way to show what we can do if we invest in folks.
Well, I know that Frank Banker, who obviously is not running for re-election, but is a person. He has been, Michael's one of his biggest supporters in D3. So I know that he is, is going to, look for whomever is going to be in D3 to have that same level of commitment to the work that he's doing. So.
I mean, I made the commitment when I went to him there. I think, anyone who's doing that type of work, I will support and champion and talk about, because I think it's what we need to kind of strengthen our community.
Outstanding. In that same vein, let's shift to the Suffolk County House of Correction, and also falls in D3. So we know that that's where people are coming out of incarceration, and also is where Mass and Cast, I call it Miracle Mile, because I believe that they're miracles. One, just I am a person in recovery, so I deal with addiction and understand and can empathize with that struggle, with trauma. So my heart bleeds really for the trauma and the situation. With that said, I also do understand that what's going on there and what's being allowed to happen in terms of open air trafficking, of sales of drugs and human trafficking, and the violence is unacceptable.
Yes.
And just so I'm happy to hear that there's a call to a tipping point because of the violence. It was a stabbing last night at the Roundhouse Hotel. I mean, the officers are being attacked, and it's just horrible to allow people to maintain in this condition that's just getting worse and spiraling out of control. And we understand that much of that has happened because of the Long Island Bridge, and it's and the Long Island, and the mayor's talking about being able to rebuild that and the challenges politically and all that, and that being 4 years down the road. So curious in terms of what is some of your strategy and plan around addressing again the Mass and Cast, and I would even say the Suffolk County House of Correction. I'll go to that a little more detail because the civic engagement piece is something that we're working aggressively inside Suffolk County House of Correction, Nashville County Jail, to be able to empower our returning citizens to exercise their right to vote and be participatory, and being able to change the systems that created, that's affecting their family and the loved ones that is there, while they're there to get the resources and the services they need to be able to rehabilitate and to participate, even as people who may be serving felony convictions. Is we're the third state in the country to move a piece of legislation to a constitutional amendment agenda, where now it's waiting to be pulled from that, and hopefully it won't stay there and just die, and will actually pass the governor's desk, and will be restored the right to vote for felons that happened up until 2000, when it was taken from people here in the state of Massachusetts. So I gave you a lot, but
all right. Let's start with Mass and Cast, and then we can go to the Suffolk House of Correction. So I started addiction from the place. My family has dealt with alcoholism. My friends have dealt with opioid addiction. I've lost friends to opioid addiction. I've had friends who have come out on the other side, some who are actually now running treatment centers. And so when I think about it, I just start with, folks are dealing with a disease.
Yes.
And that's where we need to start.
Yeah.
I have been to Atkinson Street, so where the encampment is now 5 times. I've walked the neighborhood in the South End with folks who live there. I've helped Sue Sullivan in the Newmarket Business Association clean up twice. I've been back. I've talked to Boston Police. I've talked to the Boston Public Health. I've talked to the folks dealing with addiction there. And I think it is horrific what's happening. We are herding people like cattle behind police barricades. And we are not giving them the full opportunity to get treatment. Yeah. At the same time, as you kind of quickly touched on, women are being trafficked in and out of those tents.
That's real talk.
Right, and that is unacceptable. And so while we think about that, while we think about how are we going to get these folks treatment, how are we going to stop women from being trafficked, Really, how are we going to, there are people over there who are preying on the folks battling addiction.
That's right.
But at the same time, I have a 3-year-old. I live in Savin Hill, and he almost picked up a needle, And so I have a friend who lives in Upham's Corner who has a 5-year-old, and they walked out of their house, and unfortunately an individual overdosed and died in front of them in the car, And so as we think about treatment and as we think about public safety, we also need to think about the quality of life of the neighbors, Because children should not be picking up needles where they play, right? And I'm forgetting the name of the football team that had to stop playing in that park, right? Because there's too many needles. 5-year-olds shouldn't be seeing people overdose and die, right? So what we need to do is have a strategic approach, first as a city, advancing public health, public safety, quality of life. And they all need to move forward together. And they are not counter opposites of each other. They're not pushing against each other. We can do all three of those together as a strategic plan. But let's be very clear. This is not a city of Boston problem. Go down there and talk to the police, talk to the public health officials, talk to the individuals dealing addiction. There are folks from Plymouth. There are folks from Quincy, which is stopping us from building that bridge. There are folks from the North Shore. There are folks from Georgia.
Yes.
And so what really should happen is the question should no longer be to Michelle Wu, and it shouldn't have started with Marty Walsh, of whether we're going to rebuild the bridge. The question should be to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where are we going to build a treatment center? We used to, unfortunately, incarcerate folks with intellectual disabilities. Around this state, there are properties that are where we used to incarcerate these folks that are unused, including in Medfield, that we could open a treatment center today. The cabins, right, the small cabins at the Shattuck, which are actually working, right, because it creates a geographic distance between Mass and Cass and folks trying to get treatment. We could put more of those out at Medfield tomorrow. And so the question should not solely be what is Boston going to do. The question should be what is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and really what is New England as a whole, because this Mass and Cass is dealing with addiction for the entire place. Addiction for New England should not be dealt with in between Massachusetts Molina Cass Boulevard and Freeport Street. And so I think first we need to, as a city, advance public health, public safety, and quality of life strategy. But then we need to get the state to take a more proactive step and get involved in dealing with what's down there, and then dispersing the services so that we can get folks off of Mass and Cass so people aren't being preyed on and women aren't being trafficked. We need to end an open air drug market. We need to have safe injection sites, and we need to be more thoughtful about what we're doing. So I think that's Mass and Cass. I think with regards to folks coming out of Suffolk County Jail, we talked about before, right? Before we came on air, right? There is a disparity in the criminal justice system. I saw it. I was arrested for disorderly conduct, got bailed out. My parents helped me get a lawyer, and I went back to get arraigned. And in walked, I would peg maybe 18 to 20-year-old black guy, dreads, right? Handcuffs, shackles. You would think violent crime, right? No, he had skipped out in a taxi. And so too often the folks with a good lawyer are white. And too often the folks who are coming in handcuffs and shackles are black or brown. And so anyone who says that there is not a disparity in the criminal justice system has never seen the criminal justice system. And so I think we need to start to talk about the criminal justice system for what it is. And we need to work to make sure, right, if you do something wrong, you should go through and deal with what you did, right? But that should not necessarily, if you skip out on a taxi, that should not stay with you for the rest of your life, right? I was proud to support and work for Governor Patrick when he passed Corey reform, right? So that indiscretion of a young teen wouldn't stay with him for the rest of his life. So I think we need to work to make sure that folks, right, are able to as you were talking about, right, serve their time, but then come out and come back and get trained and get back into society and not get caught in that cycle of imprisonment, because otherwise all we're going to do is just keep having folks come out and go back in. And that not only impacts them, it impacts their families and impacts their communities. And so if we want to really support communities, we need to start to have really training when folks come out, helping with mental health issues, right? Undoubtedly, you're dealing with that when you come out. So I think we need to work around all of that.
Thank you. We've got about 4 minutes before we will have to go to our station ID at the top of the hour. We will go to our station ID, and if it's okay, and we can continue the dialogue on the other side of the top of the hour. But thank you. That's powerful. With regard to the folks who are at Nashua, and South Bay. I said the Suffolk County, right?
Yep.
So in the Suffolk County House of Correction, again, we people are specially qualified here in the state of Massachusetts. So if they are not presently serving a felony conviction, they can vote. With that, and they can vote via an absentee ballot, right? Don't even, quite candidly, have to register. However, with all that said, first of all, many of them don't know that. Not only did they not know that, but correctional officers inside the institution often don't know that. Sheriff Tompkins does know that, and he affords us to come in to be able to tell his correctional officers who may not be aware that no, we've got clearance. Yes, they can, and we do. We're working with Harvard students. We're working with BU students. We're working with, and we are creating curriculum to be able to do civic education that's general. Because even as we go in and we tell them that you can, they're surprised to learn that some of them don't understand. Like even if that they don't feel like it's for them, like what difference is it going to make? But when they had forums like what a difference a DA makes, that they understood that was relevant to them, and all the candidates came inside and they were able to ask them their questions, and hence Rachel Rollins became the Suffolk County DA that was not the heir apparent. And many people helped to get her in who actually were incarcerated at MCI Norfolk who could not vote but had their family members who could vote for her, understanding her mindset to be able to create programs and divergent programs and so forth that's going to help people, not this perpetual punishment that is desperate to folks who are poor and black and brown, unfortunately. So with that said, Sheriff Tompkins has been really open for us to be able to come in, and we're trying to create with him a mobile ballot box initiative, right? So just as you and I get mailed to our home an mail-in ballot application, right? We have the option of completing that. If we're registered voters, we can do that and get the ballot sent to our home, fill it out, and drop it in drop boxes. We have that liberty. They're specially qualified, so they likewise don't have the step of having to register. So anybody under the custody and care of the Suffolk County that's eligible should be communicated electronically. This is what we're hoping to implement to the elections department. So they then can be able to create an absentee ballot application with the name of every person who's housed in the Suffolk County House of Correction or the National County Jail in a locked mobile ballot box that will go via a municipal officer to circumvent the mail, to go directly to those respective institutions, and then this mobile ballot box will go from unit to unit, cell to cell. They have agency to cast their ballot in this locked box that ultimately will go back to the elections department at 8 p.m. as every other person has an opportunity to be able to do. So that's the vision of the mobile ballot box initiative. And Sheriff Tompkins is in support of this, and we just passed a Voting Rights Act here in the state of Massachusetts that I believe will give us the ability to now implement that via this pilot that we're hopeful to do, that we can show outcomes that we can replicate throughout the Commonwealth. So is that something that you would support?
Yes. I can tell you, last week I called and the elections department said that, there potentially wasn't going to be early voting. I was glad to see that the mayor worked to make sure that there still is going to be early voting. So I think we need to do more to make sure that people are participating in the electoral process. I don't think there's anything stronger than someone voicing their opinion in the direction that they want our democracy to go. I think especially today, nationally, where our democracy is under attack, yes. I think anything we can do to make sure that people are able to cast a vote shows that is what our country is about. Yes. And so I think anything we can do to make sure that people are able to do that, it is important that we do.
Does that also include those who are serving felonies? Would you support universal suffrage, i.e. people who are serving felony convictions as well, who could vote here in the state of Massachusetts up until 2000 when that was stripped from them? Now it's at a unique place to be restored it was written by gentlemen from the African American Coalition Committee at MCI Norfolk. They authored this legislation from behind the wall with the support of State Representative Russell Holmes, who then, actually put it together as a state representative. And now, again, we're the third state in the country, because it literally takes a constitutional amendment in the state to be able to get that restored. and we're the third in the country to have it at this pivotal place. So as you said, I just want to know, I want to be clear, or does that include restoring rights for those who are presently serving felony convictions?
Yeah, it's a right that they just don't have the ability to exercise right now. I believe it. I believe voting is speaking up, and I think what really is, we've just said you can't speak up right now, and I think everyone should have the ability to speak up and vote.
Outstanding. And we are at the top of the hour. So with that said, family, pause, stay right there on Matthew. Forgive me. We will return on the other side of the top of the hour. Thank you.